The bridge on Tequila Wolf. I think that you guys should remember it. After Sabaody, when Kuma sent the Straw Hats flying to various places in the world, this is where he sent Robin. A massive bridge that has been under construction for around 700 years by the authority of the Celestial Dragons and still has not been completed. Have you ever wondered why it's in the story? What's its significance? Why is it being built? Where exactly is Oda going with this? So let's first talk about it, and then get into topics relating to IM, his very nature, and possibly Oda's grand moral for the story of One Piece. Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, I'm just going to tell you guys right now, this is going to be a very weird discussion. We're going to start off with Tequila Wolf, talk about a little history, economics, politics, logic, and then go to another place entirely. But I do think that they're related. I think that they build off of each other well. But without further ado, let's begin. An important first step I think that we can make here, a relatively obvious but important conclusion based on what we know, this bridge is important to the world government. This is a 700-year undertaking. I think that itself makes it clear that the government has something to gain from it. And the revolutionaries, as their enemies, do not want this bridge completed. I think that this is just an interesting aside, but have you ever taken a moment to actually look at the symbol of the world government? Their actual flag. Some people argue, and I think that I would be a part of that group, that the bridge in Tequila Wolf, or a massive bridge in general, spanning different islands, crossing the various seas, is actually depicted in this flag. The middle circle represents Revujo, or where the Celestial Dragons are, the center of the world, where each of these other 4 dots on the outside represent each of the 4 seas, the north, south, east, and west blue. Between them, the lines that connect them, is this great bridge. This bridge that they have spent 700 years constructing, it isn't even complete, and I believe that it is part of their flag. This is how important it is to them. It's a part of the world government's endgame, how they intend to transform the world. So what exactly does the government gain from this bridge? This world is very divided, and not just politically, it is divided geographically. The red line spans the entire globe as a massive, basically uncrossable barrier. Sure, some groups have managed, notably German Kingdom ships can climb the red line, but this is just a single kingdom's ability using technology that, as far as we are aware, they have not shared. Pirates and adventurers can use Reverse Mountain or sail under the red line through Fishman Island, but both of these paths are incredibly dangerous. Those who the world government allows can pass over the red line at Revujo, but in order to do this, you have to make it through the Grand Line, the notoriously difficult to sail sea. And then once you go through Revujo to the other side of the red line, you're again in the Grand Line in the New World, which is not a substantially better place to be. For your everyday person, you will never in your entire lifetime cross the red line. And the red line is just one such barrier. You also have the Grand Line itself, which we've already kind of talked about, and the Calm Belt, which run perpendicular to it. Again, it is not impossible to cross these barriers, but it is difficult. The Calm Belt is the breeding ground of the Sea Kings in an area where no wind blows. If you are strong enough to defeat the Sea Kings and have enough manpower to row your ship, you can cross it. I assume this is how it's always been done for the many centuries before this. But the limit here is how strong you actually are. Only the powerful may pass. More recently, however, Dr. Vegapunk found that covering the bottom of your ship in sea stone can allow you to pass undetected by the Sea Kings. But I don't believe that sea stone can be found in such abundance that this is a realistic method of travel for most of the world's people. In addition, Momonga tells us that there are significant limitations because while sea stone can allow you to pass the Sea Kings, it's not 100% effective because the Sea Kings can still see you. So you still need to be powerful. And again, even if you make it through the Calm Belt once, you have then entered the Grand Line in its crazy weather and the potential of being attacked by pirates. Then you have to pass through the Calm Belt again. In this world, travel between the blues is just not feasible for the vast majority. This, I believe, is one of the reasons the Celestial Dragons are building this bridge, and I would wager the reason that they would be using to justify it to the people of the world. Trade and travel is generally good, What if there was a plant or a medicine that could only be created in, say, the South Blue, for a persistent illness in the North Blue, or a great famine across a large portion of a particular sea, or a particular natural resource that would be important elsewhere? And this additionally could help the world prosper. Merchants in the West Blue can now relatively easily sell their products to those in all the other blues. However, you gotta keep this in mind, we are talking about the world government and the celestial dragons. It is very doubtful that this bridge is some kind of charity to the people. The world nobles absolutely have something to gain for themselves. They would own this bridge. Sure, other people may get to use it if they are allowed, but the people controlling it would be the celestial dragons, the world nobles. Here's a hypothetical for you. Assuming you were a kind of merchant, and you could travel to the other blues via methods we previously discussed and sell your goods. What does the world government and the celestial dragons gain from this? Nothing. Nothing at all. They can't tax travel across the sea. But if you travel across their bridge, they could charge you for the convenience. Sure, you can use our bridge, but there will be a toll. This is how the powerful become even more so. By controlling a necessity. If you're looking for a historical equivalent for this, read up on how the Vanderbilt family became the richest in the United States with a monopoly over railway travel in the 1800s. But it's actually even more concerning than this. The world nobles decide who can cross their bridge or not. They decide who is successful and who is not. Anyone in the world who would want to compete on the free market across the globe would have to be in the celestial dragon's good graces. We already know that the members of the world government are forced to pay a heavenly tribute, it's called money and treasure, directly to the world nobles for the defense they provide. Well, now, potentially, if you aren't paying as much as someone else, they could hypothetically deny you access to this bridge and ruin your business or your entire country's economy, especially if an entire country's economy becomes reliant on this bridge. What you would eventually be left with probably is a very corrupted system. Those who play by the celestial dragon's rules get to stay powerful, while those who don't will be destroyed. While the system that is currently in place isn't ideal, at least the celestial dragons do not control the sea itself. You can trade within your blue and neighboring islands without being taxed or restricted by the world government specifically or the celestial dragons for it. This bridge would absolutely work to help the celestial dragons continue to rule the world for the foreseeable future. And in many ways, they wouldn't have to worry so much about pirates either, since the routes would be easily defendable. Without any oversight, the ones who control this bridge would have far too much power to dictate the entire world's economy. But this isn't the only benefit for the world government. The Bridge of Tequila Wolf is likely inspired by the Burma Railway built in Southeast Asia by the Empire of Japan during World War II. This railway was built by civilian laborers and prisoners of war who were essentially forced into its construction. But I don't want to get this twisted. The people who built this railway were essentially slaves. Over the course of the year of its construction, over 100,000 people died, giving it the name the Death Railway. So the context here is somewhat important. During World War II, the Japanese relied upon using the sea to bring supplies and troops to Burma where they were fighting. However, the problem with this was that the only reasonable route they could take was notoriously hazardous. So for our One Piece comparison here, the Empire of Japan didn't want to cross over the Red Line or the Grand Line. Looking for alternatives, they began construction on this railway, which would pass directly through the land. By the time that the railway was completed, it required nearly 600 bridges. I don't know if many of you out there have heard of the famous classical film or book, The Bridge on the River Kwai, but that was what that was about. And I assume this is where Oda found his inspiration for Tequila Wolf. And so I think through this, we can perhaps uncover the world government's true plan for the bridge at Tequila Wolf. Warfare. This is just one of those interesting things about the world over the past 900 years. The world government started off as just 20 kings. From there they grew, of course, but even to this day they do not control the entire world. And even beyond that, they have some difficulty protecting and controlling what they already do have. In my opinion, this may in fact be the primary purpose of the Tequila Wolf Bridge, a highway for soldiers to cross in order to conquer and control the world militarily. Of course, you find Marines all across the world, but I think that there's some significance to Oda specifically placing the center of power in Marineford and New Marineford directly where the Celestial Dragons and Mary Joie is. One of the most difficult things about having a very large army is being able to supply them. And right now, geographical barriers severely limit what the world government can achieve. Take the former Germa Kingdom and the North Blue as an example. If the world government wanted to fight them and actually defeat them, then they would have to send a whole lot of troops to the North Blue. But you have to keep in mind that the actual countries, the land there, is controlled by Germa. How exactly is the world government to supply their troops to a level that could actually sustain such a large conflict? And frankly, before the bridge is complete, it would be difficult to even get a foothold in the North Blue to begin with. But of course, Germa is no longer a threat. Where I think that this would be most significant is if there was some kind of revolution, if a blue tried to break off from the world government. Under those circumstances, I think that would be a very difficult war for the world government to be able to fight, to be able to maintain their power. But with this massive bridge, they would have a foothold in every sea, and already built, highly defendable supply and troop lines. In my mind, this bridge, once completed, is kind of like the final nail in the coffin of being able to overthrow the world government. I just think that it's interesting to think about this bridge, what I deduced to be its purpose and the world government and world nobles' long-standing ambitions. It really didn't take long, a couple hundred years? And they already conceived a way to practically guarantee control of this world for the thousands of years to follow. Control trade and travel while building a military highway to reach every corner of the world. So we're about to switch gears here pretty drastically, and I think a lot of you may not know how we go from where we are now to where we are going to go. But in my mind, jumping off from where we are now is a perfect place to talk about control and talk about freedom, because the concepts go hand in hand. The more control someone has over you, the less freedom you have. So for me, explaining it the way that we have, this bridge embodies control and the world government's desire for it. But anyway, guys, let's press forward and talk about black and white. I think that it's pretty easy to think of the Marines as a kind of villain in the story, a kind of rot in this world that needs to be removed. But I'm not entirely sure. I think that the Marines as an idea, as an organization, is very positive. They are in many cases the world's law enforcement. They protect civilians. After the story ends, I expect that they will still exist. The world, I believe, is better with them than without. For every Akainu or Axehand Morgan, there's a Kobe, or there's a Smoker, or there's a Garp. And even more than that, I don't think that the idea of a world government is that bad either. The issue is those who abuse power to their own advantage and others suffering. The problem is that individuals, celestial dragons, rule over the collective that we call the world government. So perhaps you could argue here that the true enemy is individuality, humanity. Heroes and villains exist everywhere. We like to put the celestial dragons into a box, but we saw an example of Otohime saving a celestial dragon, and it changed him. It made him into a better person. One Piece is just filled with great characters and uncertainty. I think time and time again we try to make this black and white, and at every turn, Oda makes that impossible to do. I very much doubt that one single organization or group has it right. There is not a single organization in One Piece that is purely filled with black or white characters. Not one. And even the blackest of characters, the enemies, the villains, they're a dark shade of gray. And so far, most everybody has had a chance to be redeemed. But it's just interesting to think about. Perhaps the most difficult obstacle in defeating the world nobles is everybody that surrounds them. To get to them, how many innocent lives would you have to take? There are many noble people who fight for the celestial dragons. This is one of the more difficult questions, I think, in life, right? We all want to avoid war, we want to avoid suffering, but when exactly does it become imperative to start a war? Who or what are we actually fighting, and how is it even possible to defeat them? But you know, it's topics like this that make me think about IMU. This whole time I've said, the celestial dragons are to blame, but are they really? Do they hold any real power? Probably not. They might be the face of this evil, of this darkness, But likely they are not the evil itself. Imu pulls the strings, he sits on the throne. What does he want? How does he plan to get what he wants? And for him, what role does everybody else play? Based on what we know right now, I think that it's hard to exclusively define Imu as evil. Just another gray character. On one hand, he says that he's going to extinguish a light. But on the other hand, he appears to be wise and thoughtful. We see him delicately touch a butterfly in a way which I think Oda's trying to convey gentleness. It doesn't appear like he's murdering, who he wants when he wants. He takes time to think through what he wants to do. He's very careful. In the couple of panels that we saw him ignoring bias, it appears as though Imu could be more complex than I think many people in the fandom consider him to be. What is his true nature? Every fight the Straw Hats have ever had has had a narrative purpose, and I believe all of the fighting will culminate with Oda delving into concept he has spent the entire series hinting at. Time and again, Luffy exclaims that he wishes to be the Pirate King. But that's not it. As he explained to Rayleigh, the Pirate King is just the most free person on the sea. Being the Pirate King to Luffy means more than just being king of the pirates. It means being the freest. So first and foremost, what is important to Luffy is that Luffy wants freedom. For himself, and I believe also for others. He wants to live his life the way that he chooses. We talked earlier about the world government's desire for control. This and Luffy's mentality cannot coexist. As Goldie Rogers says, inherited will, destiny of the age, and the dreams of the people. These are things that will not be stopped. As long as people continue to pursue the meaning of freedom, these things will never cease to be. This just feels like something that would be a climactic theme in One Piece. What is the meaning of freedom? As long as people continue to pursue the meaning of freedom, inherited will, destiny, and the dreams of the people will never cease to be. I think that this is one of the integral questions One Piece poses. What is freedom? How can it be achieved? And what kind of world is that like? Freedom is not an inherently good thing. Sure, Luffy wants to be free, sail around and protect his friends and adventure, but what if someone wished for the freedom to murder and kill? Freedom can be good or bad, depending on who uses it. Freedom really, for me, is merely the absence of restriction, thus leaving you with your own impulses or whatever impulses an individual would have. Some are good and some are bad. It is not black or white, it's very gray. Now, assuming Imu is truly gentle and kind and thoughtful, I wonder whether or not Imu interprets freedom to be a bad thing. If he is this person that perhaps we can imply him to be, but at the same time, control the world in the way that he does. In some ways, this could potentially be similar to Oda's commentary about Big Mom, but taken to an entirely other level. Big Mom wants to do good. She has a vision for the future of the world as being peaceful and everybody getting along, but nobody will listen to her, and when they don't, she forces them to follow her rule. She restricts others' freedom for the sake of what she thinks is best, and sometimes for her own immature reasons. Perhaps Imu is like this, but in a much more direct way, like he actually knows what he is doing. Perhaps he seeks the future of the world government's total control for the sake of the people's, everybody's well-being. Perhaps he believes freedom can be good, but too often it is not. See what happens when you allow people to be free. They step on each other. They harm each other. In this way, as the architect of the world government, perhaps the world government's desire for control is somewhat understandable. Maybe for Imu, he sees the celestial dragons as a kind of means to an end, a necessary evil to create the world he desires. Even the Gorosei, Imu's direct underlings, evil incarnation at times, they gave me the impression early on that they didn't want to harm Ohara. They have a heart. It gives me the impression that they are doing what they feel is necessary. What is this story really about? But just as freedom can be either good or bad, I think restricting it is the same. To me, this is really interesting. We assume that the hero must stand for everything that is good. But is Luffy's ideals what the world should actually strive for? A blatant disregard for rules and laws that exist for the purpose of everyone's well-being and their protection? I understand that the world is currently corrupted, but what if it wasn't? Where does Luffy actually draw the line? And is this place where Oda deems the best balance lies? You gotta keep in mind that this is a story about pirates. Is a world ruled by and led by pirates really the best version of this world? What do the heroes really need to do in order to fix this? I think the same could be applied to the government. How much should you resist freedom? How far is too far? How much is not enough? I'm not entirely sure this question has an answer, but if I were to guess, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It typically does. Given the option between complete anarchy and a dictator, I think I'd prefer not to choose. I think that would make for a unique ending to One Piece. Even after Luffy saves the world, I mean, he's still a criminal by nature. Even if he's a kind-hearted, relatively harmless criminal. I'm telling you right now, Luffy would never pay taxes, not in any universe. Perhaps he's what the world needs, but not entirely what it needs to become. To me, it's almost as if Oda is saying that as long as people have a will of their own, dream for the future and have a role to play in the present, freedom and the pursuit of it cannot be suppressed. Human nature will prevail. These things will never cease to be. Perhaps a fitting moral of a story about pirates. People's dreams never end. Perhaps there is more to this quote than meets the eye. The more that you try to control people, the more that you find that the task itself is impossible, even if you were to have good intentions. And how far exactly should anybody be willing to go in order to suppress an individual's freedom for the betterment of everybody else? At what point will people, as their nature, push back? And at the same time, is this kind of mentality sometimes what the world needs in order to overcome injustice? So we began this video talking about Tequila Wolf, and what it represents to me now, after we've had this conversation, is Tequila Wolf represents complete control, a vision of supremacy. Perhaps Oda's moral here, perhaps Oda's point, his lesson, is that it doesn't matter for what reason that you want to control others. They will always fight for freedom. They will always fight for the opportunity to choose for themselves. But anyway, guys, I understand that parts of this video are very abstract. Some of it doesn't necessarily support the other. But I think that these are some of the questions that we absolutely should be asking. What is the true nature to this conflict in the world of One Piece? As always, guys, food for thought. But yeah, guys, that is pretty much all I had to say today. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.